Hello, I'm going to take it from the top again because apparently recording has just started. My name is Grant Howitt. I write one-page games. I assume if you're watching this talk, you already know a little bit about my work. If not, I've written Spire, Heart, Honey Heist, One Last Job, Goblin Quest, a whole bunch of games, and a lot of them are quite silly, but I'm most famous for doing one-page games. And I was asked by the organisers of Konline to come and give a presentation about the practice of doing that, and hopefully I can give you some insight on things that I've learned over that time. I've got about a 20-minute lecture, which I'm going to go through, and then after that, if folks have questions, I'll be happy to answer them up until the end of the session. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. 5 things I have learned from 5 years of writing one-page games. Hello! My name is Grant Howitt, and I write one-page games about animal criminals for a living. The most popular game about criminal animals that I have written is Honey Heist, but you may also have heard of Crash Pandas or Goat Crashers. Here is a loose summary of some of what I have learned in my 5 years of designing and releasing RPGs through Patreon, and I hope that you can learn something from it when making your own games, whether they're one-page or full-length. I also write longer games, by the way. I have written 2 full-length RPGs with my co-author Chris Taylor, and they deal with serious topics like oppression and revolution and equality and obsession and tragic desire. But really, what people want on the average evening is to pretend to be a bear and steal something. So here we are. First things first, I am absurdly lucky. Yes, I am good at writing games, but I am also white, able-bodied, English-speaking, cisgender, straight-passing, middle-class, and free of almost all known chronic health problems. The only thing I have working against me is depression. I don't think I know any games designers who don't have some kind of mental illness. Similarly, I am lucky because Critical Role decided to play one of my games, and that means people have heard of me. When Marisha Ray decided to lay a benediction on me in the form of running Honey Heist on her massively popular role-playing game show, it resulted in a huge influx of support and notoriety. I was fortunate enough for her to pick my game out of hundreds of others, and for that, I am grateful. All of this is to say that I got a head start on people who are of other genders, races, sexualities, classes, and nationalities, and who haven't been discovered by Critical Role. So it was much easier for me to be successful as the world, especially the RPG world, is already set up for me to exist in it. I'm not especially brilliant at writing games, but I have been doing it loudly for a while, and I've learned a few things along the way, and I might be able to help you not make the same mistakes I did. Which brings me to my first real piece of advice. Thing 1, I'm sorry, but you have to draw a picture on it. Social media has given us an incredible tool to promote our games. I believe that Twitter is largely responsible for the success of my career, as it's allowed me to show my games directly to the people that want to see them, without relying on advertisers, PR firms, or publishers. Not only that, but people can retweet my games into their own feed, and I can reach untold thousands of people with every release. I can do some interesting and strange things with game design, and make it accessible to more people than I'd ever be able to meet in real life. But, you have to draw a picture on it or no one gives a damn. I could write the best one-page RPG the world has ever seen, a perfect blend of rules and setting, condensed down into a pristine gem of design, and no one would ever read it, unless I drew a bear wearing a hat on it, or something. People cannot read and understand your game in the time that the ceaseless scroll of social media makes available to them. And what's more, a lot of people don't care how good your game is. Only other games designers care how good your game is. More people are going to endorse a game with a name that's a good pun, or that happens to be about whatever's popular this week, than they will an elegantly written reimagining of the classics. Listen, this is where I've ended up. I have a popular style, and I have a business to keep ticking over, and the funds from my Patreon form a not insignificant percentage of our monthly income. I don't know how long I can keep releasing one-page games without them becoming stale and derivative. I'm up to 50 now, I think, but I'm holding out for now. You don't need to do this. You can write beautiful, inscrutable, introspective, and deeply personal games that examine precisely what it means to roleplay, and what it means to be a person, what it means to be you, As long as you're okay with no one buying them, don't worry about it. The end goal of art is not money, but art, and there are much easier ways to make money than getting into this business. Brief aside, for a short while, back at the start of the last decade, I trained to be a Mexican wrestler. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. It wasn't for me. I have the athletic prowess of a Hessian sack, and I never figured out how to fall over without badly hurting myself every time. But it taught me something really important about self-promotion. See, in Mexican wrestling, there's no time to build up a nuanced story behind your wrestling persona. There's no backstage promos, no out-of-the-ring drama, and given the scale you're working at, the majority of any audience, A, won't have seen you wrestle before, and B, is already drunk by the time the match starts. Once you emerge, you have about 10 seconds to sell yourself to the crowd. They don't need to like you, but they need to understand what you're about, enough to at least have some curiosity about you. Otherwise, you just fade into the background. Twitter is the same. There is an infinite variety of media available to everyone you're trying to sell your game to, much of it expressly designed to draw their attention away from other media. You're asking your users to click away from their feed, download a PDF, maybe for money, and then read that PDF, when instead they could move their index finger a fraction of an inch and look at a short video of a cat falling into a box. Why would anyone download a PDF when that's available? We're in the wrong business, by the way. We need to start filming cats. So, make your game clear. Work on your one-sentence pitch. Describe it in a way that engages the curiosity of the reader. Draw a goddamn picture of a bear on it, if that's what it takes, or at least a picture of something that's alive and active, because that's going to be immediately understandable to everyone involved, or at least engaging, and that's what counts. Thing 2, you need to find your style. I write games about criminal animals. Actually, only about 20% of my games fit that category, even if you squint, but they're the popular ones. From a more academic standpoint, I write games that give people the opportunity to misbehave and act as agents of chaos in ordered locations, whilst maintaining a healthy arm's reach from reality, due to the fact that they are anthropomorphized animals. I can never pronounce that word, which is apparently cathartic. These games are designed to be run once and then not returned to, unlike most long-form role-playing games, which are expressly written for campaign play. They are freely distributed. They lack the reverence and cost of, say, a full set of Dungeons & Dragons books or a special edition of Bluebeard's Bride. Not only do they encourage misbehavior, but they discourage long-term consequences for that misbehavior. They are one-use magic circles, brief and ephemeral things, which try to stay cemented enough in traditional game mechanics to give established players a framework to operate within. For example, most of my games rely on pretty standard, roll the dice and add a number, and if you get a high number, that's good type of mechanics, as opposed to walk into the forest, close your eyes for 30 seconds whilst repeating the favorite color of your best friend from high school, then name the first tree you see after you open them. I want them to be identifiable as role-playing games to even the most skeptical grognard. That's the space I'm operating in. My games aren't heartbreaking. They aren't going to help you understand your friends, or your environment, or the plight of a particular displaced people. They aren't going to allow for unparalleled tactical play. They are, hopefully, going to allow you and your friends the chance to misbehave in a socially safe way for 2 to 3 hours, and maybe provide an excuse to spend some time together. That's my style. Focused disobedience. When I release something outside of that style, it doesn't do so well, because it's not what people were expecting, and perhaps I'm not as good at making other types of games. So you should try to find your style, because once people can identify with your niche, they can get excited for your next project. They can back your patron, or playtest your game, or talk about you on social media. They can understand your work in a holistic way, and you go from being a loose collection of cells that releases random collections of words to something predictable, understandable, and supportable. Also, your style can and will and should change as you develop as an artist. You are not locked into one thing and one thing only. Your style is a mix of what you enjoy making, what you're good at making, and how people perceive your work. Don't be afraid to shake it up and make something unusual. Just be aware that people are expecting one thing from you, and giving them something else might be a harder sell. Excuse me. I'm just going to make sure I'm still broadcasting okay. I am still broadcasting okay. Great. Thing 3. You need to strike a balance. My co-author, Chris Taylor, who eschews the spotlight and would rather remain in profitable obscurity for the remainder of his career, has a very wise insight on rules and how they relate to the story. The fewer rules a game has, the easier it is to introduce story to it without mechanics getting in the way. And the more rules it has, the easier it is to automatically generate story through the interaction of those rules. Personally, I like a game with very few rules and plenty of opportunities to just tell a story, and he likes games with buckets of rules that have interesting and unexpected outcomes. Our differing preferences are probably why it takes us a full year to write a core mechanic. But there is a sweet spot to be found in between storytelling in a circle with a guitar and Champion's 6th edition, and Chris calls it friction. Each point of friction is a place where the players or the GM can interact mechanically with the game, changing parts of it. In Dungeons & Dragons, when I'm trying to kill an enemy, their AC is friction. Their hit points are friction. Their positioning on the tactical map is friction. My weapon accuracy feats are friction, as is my weapon's damage and whatever spell the bard cast on me before the fight began. All these come together, moderated by dice results, to create a snapshot of a story where I swing my weapon at an orc and we see whether it's enough to kill him, whether he parries my blow, and so on and so forth. Compare this to Lasers and Feelings, arguably one of the most popular one-page games that exists. I have a single point of friction, which is the number I chose for my character, and whether or not I roll over it or under it depends on the fictional description of my action. Do I hit the alien with my laser blast? How badly do I hurt it? That's up to the GM to invent based on one of 6 rolled numbers in comparison to the singular number I picked. It's a series of improv cues with little to no mechanical outcome. Neither of these are the right or wrong way to do things, but they're useful things to think about. How much friction is there in your game between the mechanics and the fiction? What stands between the creative energy and choices of the players and GM and the purely fictional world you're all imagining together? Thing 4. You need to think about the people playing your games. Have you ever run a one-page role-playing game? It's exhausting, isn't it? To compare, what's the longest session of Dungeons & Dragons you've ever run? For me, it was about 7 hours, and I was still good to talk about elves after it was over. There is a necessity in one-page games to cut down rules to their bare essentials. We simply don't have the room to include non-essential friction. Most one-pages center around a singular core mechanic with slight variations based on player choice that make favorable outcomes more likely, and leave the specifics of marrying mechanics and story to the GM. This means they're not able to relax into letting the game run itself, relying on established norms and understood mechanics, but instead they have to maintain a full understanding of the imaginary environment at all times, and communicate it to the players, if they're a good GM, and be ready to improvise an outcome based on whatever input the players give. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but the mental strain it places on someone steering your game cannot be underestimated. Just because a game is short and about something silly, it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to play. When you're writing a game, you need to consider the way in which it will be played, and how much mental work the GM and players will have to do to keep it running. I realize now, I called it 5 things in 5 years. I actually wrote 6 things and didn't change the number. So it's 6 things, not 5. My sincere apologies. Thing 5, you shouldn't say your games are bad. There is a trend amongst one-page games designers, one that I myself still fall prey to, where we describe our own games in negative terms. For a long time, my Patreon boasted quick and dirty role-playing games. I've called my work silly, daft, scrappy, unprofessional, and so on. Why is this? Primarily, it lets us put our games at an emotional arm's reach from ourselves. If we couch our releases in language that sets up the reader to expect something a bit rubbish, then we don't have to feel as invested in the work. It's okay if they don't like it, because we're not taking it seriously. We can't get our feelings hurt if a game doesn't land especially well because, hey, we weren't really trying or anything. This is a terrible idea. It puts people off your games before they've even read them. It invalidates their existence. I don't care if your games are bad. You don't get to say they are. What you are doing, like it or not, is making art. You're designing systems and building worlds and giving people the keys to fantastical locations they'd never thought of. They never would have thought of if it weren't for you. So be proud of what you do. I know you are proud of it too, especially if it's an indie game that you released yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone through the trouble of releasing it. You don't have to say that your games are the best. You don't have to say that your games are reinventing the wheel, or that they're heartbreaking works of staggering genius, or that they're the best things since sliced D20s. But at least give them a fighting chance. Thing 6 of 5. Make mistakes. You are going to make mistakes, and this is a good thing. Here's the biggest piece of advice I can give you. Release games. Release short games, broken games, bad games, weird games, unfinished games, messy games, games that break copyright laws. Release them privately amongst your friends and publicly on the internet or at conventions. If you spend forever trying to craft the perfect game, you'll never release it, and you'll never make a mistake, and you'll never have a chance to grow and develop. You'll never get better. When you make mistakes, it means you're pushing up against the limits of your abilities, and that's where we find fascinating and beautiful art. There's a pattern I see repeated a couple of times a year. Someone ran D&D many years ago, made their own homebrew setting, fudged a load of house rules in there, put it in a drawer, then unearthed it and decided that it was good enough to write a system to go alongside it. The game that comes out of this, despite the author's proud statements of a decade of playtesting, is almost invariably awful. They are cancerous, ingrown things, with dense self-referential settings, rules made up of hundreds of edge cases sutured together into a semi-functional whole, and little chance of capturing any attention in the outside world. It all took too long. The practice of reserving something until it's perfect means that it inevitably grows stale. What we need more of is wild, unresearched, half-baked nonsense. Settings and systems that barely hang together. A powerful sense of anti-canon. Things that can barely be classified as games. To hell with trying to make something sculpted and pristine. You're on the outskirts of a niche industry. Nothing you write is going to make a mark on Dungeons and Dragons. Don't be afraid of doing it wrong. Be afraid of not doing it. That is my 6 out of 5 things. Oh God, my camera. Sorry. That is my 6 out of 5 things. Which I've learned through my time as a role-playing games designer. Now I'm going to bring this up here. So, I'm interested. If any of you have any questions, please say something in chat or turn on your camera and wave, and I will perhaps be able to unmute you. Maybe I will be. Who knows? Say something in chat, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm going to wave.
Hello.
Grant.
And you can unmute yourself. Wonderful. Good. Hello.
Hello. It's great to have you here.
He's just a cheater. Ignore him.
I wanted to ask, which game was the one that you struggled with the most with cutting the stuff out? You know, you had like hardest time of reducing it to this one page.
I think the one I had the hardest time was with probably Crash Pandas. So Crash Pandas is a game where you play 5 raccoons driving the same car. And the challenge from that came with, I had a really big list of equipment, and I had like a fun list of stats for raccoons to be. And then, because I co-designed it with Chris, as I mentioned him a couple of times in the chat, we got to the point where we tried to work out what the hell the rules were for driving, which is a huge part of the game. And everything we came up with was too complex. We had turn diagrams drawn out, and all of the driving games which we'd played before were things like Gorkamorka or Dark Future and that sort of thing. So what we ended up doing was you just move the car around a little map, and then if it feels kind of cheeky, the GM can adjust it. And all Crash Pandas comes down to is moving a car around the map and making like brum brum noises. And that's mainly because we couldn't fit any sort of serious rules on a page. But thankfully, because it was so freeing, it's been a really popular game because people have the capacity to just do a stupid story about raccoons. So yeah, that would be the other one. I think the other biggest problem I had was a game called Briarwood, which I put out and became a 2-page game rather than a 1-page game because I just had too many rules there.
There is a question from the chat.
Oh, sure.
How much time goes to playtesting 1-page game? How many changes are made? How often game becomes something completely different than the initial idea?
I do not playtest my 1-page games. I write them too often. It is not entirely sensible. I used to playtest all of my games quite thoroughly back in the day when I was doing like One Last Job, Warrior Poet, that sort of thing. I used to test them 2 or 3 times each until it was something which I felt was really good. But I wouldn't make that many changes. I think at that point what I was doing, I was nervous around people liking my games, around releasing them out there. And also I was still coming to an understanding about how to understand mechanics and how to make them work properly. And so as I hit these 1-page games, it was very much the ethos that these are quick and dirty things. These are scrappy, and they're potentially not going to be played by a lot of people. They're not costing a lot of money, and so while we playtest our big games pretty seriously, we have full playtest schemes set out and Google forms to fill out and 20 different groups playing it and giving us feedback and playtesting it in-house and out-house. With 1-page games, I'm pretty sure they work. And so generally what I'll do is if I'm not sure about something, I'll send it around my friends and ask them, and they'll say, oh, this is good for this reason, or you might want to change that, or why have you done that? And then we'll tweak it because they're so simple 1-page games. Generally what I find in playtesting is there'll be some interlocking of mechanics and some sort of edge cases which come together, which mean this doesn't function as a mechanic, and so you can cut that out. But once you've got a pretty robust core mechanic, you're all right. You can just release it. In terms of through soliciting feedback, I'll mention that B. McLeod. Is that Brendan McLeod? Mr. McLeod. I will mention this. I think the best thing you can do in terms of getting playtesting feedback, an awful lot of people will recommend, you want to go to like a playtest subreddit, you want to go to a 1-page games thing, you want to try and get a community of people who play your games and do that. That's okay, but it's really not sustainable, especially when you're just starting out, when you're trying to find your footing. And the best thing you can do is go and play other people's games. Go and play other people's playtestable games. Make yourself useful and give feedback on their games. Try and be available to play other people's games. And then at that point, when it comes to playtest time, you have people whose opinions that you trust, hopefully, who are informed and aware of the medium, rather than just some rando who you've pulled in off the street to try and have a go on your game. And you'll know that their opinions are valuable, but crucially, you can tap them for that. You can say, I would like to have that played. So I think forming a group of people who you trust, who are at your level, who are your peers, who you are interested in playing games with, is the best way of doing things. You can all bring each other up, and you're not worried about bothering people who are too busy. You're not worried about people not understanding the things. Make friends, basically. Make friends and play games with each other, and then try and release something. We have another question here from a name I'm not going to try and pronounce. My apologies. says, "What is your favorite game?" Every parent has one. You can whisper so others don't hear it. My favorite game. So I think the most important game that I've played was Moses. Cracking. Thank you, Moses. Moses writes in, "What is your favorite game?" The most important game for me was I think back in 2010. It would be I played Dogs in the Vineyard by D. Vincent Baker, which is no longer available. I don't think there's a variant written by someone else, which takes out all the world building and stuff, which was my favorite thing about it. Well, kind of. Up until then, I wasn't aware that role-playing games could do one thing really well. I thought all role-playing games had to be like Dungeons and Dragons or World of Darkness, have these really big systems, these really big settings as well, which you try and cover every possible action in terms of a simulationist point of view. And so I played Dogs in the Vineyard, and for those of you who don't know, it's basically dice poker played against other players and the world. And you are continually arguing with one another, you're continually threatening one another, and it has the most beautiful escalation mechanic I've seen in a game. Things get out of hand and have unexpected consequences, and everyone's guilty all the time. It's a really beautiful system for telling that one particular story, which is about a group of about 3 to 4 virgin Mormon teenage missionaries going out into the Wild West to try and dispense justice. And they are completely unprepared for this, but they've been given absolute authority. And it's a really powerful story to tell. It's really exhausting to experience. Like the last time I played, we had to keep stopping, I think about every 40 minutes. We'd stop for about 10 minutes just to sort of chill out because it's really intense. But that showed me what a game could do, what sort of stories it could tell, and how mechanics can push things in a different way. So I think that's my favorite. That's the most important game. My favorite game is a game called Wushu, which no one has heard of, and it's heartbreaking. It's by a chap called Daniel Bain. Dan Bain. It was released back around the early 2000s. You can pick up a copy for $5 online. I don't think it's ever been in print. And it was the first game I ever ran properly. And the mechanics in Wushu, your character can fit on a cigarette paper. It's very, very small character sheet. You just write down a few phrases and 4 numbers. And then every time you add a detail to a scene, you add a dice to your dice pool. And you have a maximum number of details you can add per description, per action. And so it generates this tremendous, free-flowing, crazy, over-the-top action story, or whatever kind of story you want. It tends towards action. And it says yes to the players in a way that, the other game I was playing at the time was Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, which says no to the players a lot. No, you're not in range of this. No, you can't climb that wall. No, you can't avoid that attack. And Wushu, whatever you say is true unless someone disagrees with you. And so it was really liberating to get into that and realize that actually this is just us making a story. And we can change the parameters of what that story is doing. Now, Wushu doesn't work for long-term campaign play. It does, I'd say, about 3 sessions, and you get bored of playing with the same characters because you've experienced everything around them. You know, you start off powerful and you end powerful. There's no rules for advancement or anything. And so I can see why it hasn't been popular in that it doesn't allow long-term play. It doesn't come with an inherent setting, and so it doesn't sell very well. Generally, if you want to sell games, you need a setting which people can imagine themselves playing in. But that is my favorite game, and I would recommend that everyone goes and takes a look at it. There's another question. Let's go take a glass of water. There's another question in the chat. What is the story behind Nice Marines? Asks Chrisia. I'm pretty sure it's a cracker. I love Warhammer. I think Warhammer is really fun. I'm just going to move my camera over here, actually, to show you I've got some models here, as you can see, and then over on my bookshelf, you can see further models over there. I absolutely adore making toy soldiers, and I have done since the age of about 12 onwards. And I've always wanted to write a role-playing game set in the 40k universe. I think my most popular game, Spire, which I wrote with Chris, started off life as a Dark Heresy hack. I wanted to try and write a game which made the espionage, the brutality, the betrayal, the subterfuge of being effectively plainclothes heresy police, and take that and actually make it run, rather than the experience of playing Dark Heresy, which was missing with all your shots and then getting killed, which wasn't, like, I get what they were doing, it just wasn't fun. And so I wrote this very complex game about sort of having assets and burning them and not sort of tapping into that. And then that I realized that I couldn't publish it because 40k has quite a, you know, expensive license to get hold of, and Cubicle 7 has that pretty much under wraps. And so that changed and became Spire. We swapped out the Inquisitors for Dark Elves. We swapped out Heretics for High Elves, and just sort of went from there. And it, like, I'm really proud of the setting we've managed to build. And so Nice Marines is, I always find it really funny in Warhammer, the difference between Space Marines in the setting and Space Marines on the table. I've got a Space Marine army in a cupboard somewhere. I've got an old Black Templars army, but I never really liked Space Marines that much. I always found them a bit dull. They're a bit easy to paint, easy to play with, easy to win with, easy to build armies for. And I'm an Orc player, really, or an Imperial Guard player at heart, and I kind of got used to losing. But Space Marines in the fluff are these giant, towering, undying, kind of immortal monsters, these genderless warrior monks who descend from the sky on these mysterious chariots that no one knows how spaceships work in 40k. They just work. They descend and they kill everything. And then they're completely immune to small arms fire. They have 2 hearts. They can get an arm blown off and carry on as if nothing went wrong. They're absolutely fine. And on the table, they maybe have 2 wounds. They have toughness 4, 2 wounds, and a 3-up save. And it is possible to murder them quite easily with small arms fire. Because if you actually made them as scary as they are in the fiction, well, I suppose that's what Adeptus Custodes are. It's a little joke there for 40k players. But if you made them as powerful as they are in the fiction, you'd have about 6 models on a side. And that doesn't sell a lot of models, so you have to sort of water them down a bit. With Nice Marines, what I wanted to do was, I think it's really funny when characters in role-playing games try to do things they're not good at. I find it really frustrating that most role-playing games don't reward you for that, or don't task you with doing that. Like, the fun part, one of the best bits of any TV show is when, or any film, is when a character is out of their depth. They're trying to do something which does not lie within their skills. So, like, when the barbarian has to go and blend in at a fancy party, for example. It's funny, it's interesting, it's challenging. We see them overcoming these challenges or being defeated by them, rather than just watching them fight, which they're already good at. So with Nice Marines, I thought it'd be really fun to have people who automatically win any fight, and then put them in a load of situations which don't require fighting. And I think it is quite funny. I also think that I'm glad to have gotten the opportunity to explore the opposite of failing forwards, which is succeeding backwards. It's something which I touched on really briefly in a game I wrote last year, 2 years ago, called Wake. And Wake is a game about when you fall into a coma, you are transported to this mysterious nightmare realm, which is a load of hospitals stitched together. And as long as your body stays unconscious, you are here, and you can maybe fight your way out. And it's all very vague, but that used a blackjack mechanic of trying to get as close to your target number as possible and not over. Otherwise, you succeed, but there's collateral. And I really like the idea of succeeding so hard that something goes wrong. I was keen to introduce it when I wrote Paranoia back in 2014, 15. I don't know when I wrote it, a while ago. But we ended up with a more simple system, which didn't really go in for that. Nice Marines it felt like the perfect wrapper to put around something, which is your base response is succeeding so hard that people die. There is something quite funny about that, and it became kind of a piss take, not only of 40k, but of like, you know, war and America and England and colonialism and a bunch of other stuff. But I think it gave us the opportunity to play around in that space and maybe explore some of the things we're doing there. I did try and make every person who you interact with kind of hateful. That is the other thing about Nice Marines. I had to try and write a world where it was okay if you accidentally killed a dozen people, because otherwise you don't feel very good about playing that game. Well, I wouldn't feel very good about playing that game. Maybe you would. But yeah, that is the story behind Nice Marines. Are there any other questions, or shall we wrap this up?
So I will add to the question from Moses, which was the favorite of your games? The ones you wrote.
Oh, I see. Oh, I'm so sorry, Moses.
That's why the parent.
Yeah, I thought it was weird to refer to me as that, but yes. I see. So, favorite of my games. I wrote a game many years ago called Havoc Brigade, which no one has heard of and no one played. Havoc Brigade is available for download through itch.io and through our site, and it's a complete sort of experience in a 32-page book. The pitch is that you are a team of orcs infiltrating a fancy imperial human city. You have all the orcs hate each other. They all have reasons why they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be part of the organization, but they also have reasons why they managed to bully their way in. And so it's set up that everyone hates each other. There's no means for acting against each other. You're just going to argue. But what happens is there's a map of the city of Freiburg. You're going in to capture the Imperial Prince Holstein, who I realized after I named him, that's kind of a popular name for a cow or a breed of cow, but we stuck with it. But the rules are so loose that what it amounts to is the players point to the city map and say, I want to go there. And then they sort of carve a path of destruction through the city. Every loud thing they do makes the city more dangerous. And so the GM adds dice to things called like the chaos pool or something. And they get to roll dice out of that to make the guards and the inhabitants more dangerous against the orcs. However, once per game, every orc can grab all of those dice in the chaos pool and then roll them to do their own thing as they sort of leverage that chaos against it. And it just generates the most tremendously fun stories as players sort of sit down and they get their characters. And like there's one which is like there's a half orc infiltrator, kind of sneaky guy who says he's a sergeant but isn't a sergeant, and he has a bad moustache. There's one character which is just 6 goblins, and every time you take a wound, you cross out a goblin. There's the Ox, who is the most beautiful orc princess, which means that she's 9 foot tall, 7 foot wide, and covered in metal. And they sit down with these characters, they see the world which they go into, and then they realize they can do anything they want. And so you get the most ridiculous, over-the-top collaborative stories of people. Like, inevitably, someone tries to dress up as the goblins try to dress up as a princess and marry the prince. That's really common, to just jam a load of goblins in a dress and have them go, oh, hello, Prince Holstein. Oh, maybe we could do a kiss. And like I've had them disguise themselves as rock bands. I've had them steal the biggest animal from the zoo and crash it into the palace. I've had them build a rocket boat and fly up the river. It is tremendous fun. It is not a lot of money. It is fully illustrated by my good friend Tim Wilkinson Lewis, who did the maps for Spire. He also did the newspapers for Spire, and he did some illustrations in Goblin Quest. It has all the characters pre-gen. It has the map pre-gen. It has all the enemies there. It is ready to go. It will be some of the most fun you'll have for a con one-shot. Please go and buy it. And if you, I believe there's kind of a Patreon special version, which is available. If that isn't the one the title is Havoc Brigade. The title, the original title was Orc Hijinks. Yes, it's Havoc Brigade, because we figured that was slightly more profitable. if you find that you downloaded, thank you, Angua. If you find that you've downloaded the basic version, drop me an email. You can contact me through the site, and I'll send you the advanced version, which has 6 extra characters, including there's an Etin mage who's convinced that they're trying to be an excellent emissary to the Orc Nation. There's an Orc drunken boxer on a pub crawl, and what's the other one? Oh, it's a pirate. Yes, there's a pirate, but there's no like docks or anything, so you have to kind of work that out as you go along. But yeah, send me an email. I'll sort you out. We'll sort you out with the expanded edition. And I think that's us. Okay.
One more question. Or
okay.
Even two.
Oh, great.
Mal wrote about question about Koala.
Oh, the Koala?
She saw that Koala. When do we get to play as them?
Hang on.
What have you done?
This is my Koala.
Yeah, that's exactly the one when you were showing us your miniatures. I just, I just popped into my mind. And when do we get to play as koalas?
Well, I don't know, honestly. I've seen hacks for Honey Heist which use koalas. This was a little gift from a friend of mine. I lived in Australia for a year and a half back in the day, following my partner's career around. And so this is a gift from one of my friends in Australia. I keep it around. I don't know. I've never really felt a particular kinship for koalas. I feel they're just kind of like grimy pandas in a lot of ways. Like, I don't much care for pandas either. They're very cute, but they don't do a lot. They don't really go on like action adventures and things. So
yeah, they're mostly high most of the time.
They just sort of stand still and grip on trees. So I could see what they're popular, but I think I would rather leave that to an Australian to write a role-playing game where you play that country's bizarre and dangerous wildlife. I mean, koalas are the safest possible thing, but they've got kangaroos which can disembowel you. The spiders, there's eels on the pavement in puddles. I found there's cassowaries, which are like emus that can fight, and emus can fight. So yeah, I'm going to leave it to Australians to tackle that particular challenge. Did you say there was a second question?
Yeah, it's from me. Do you have a rainbow tattoo on your forearm?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Wrong?
Yeah, sure. There we go. I do. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It's a polygonal heart and a load of ink watercolor coming off it.
Nice.
Really nice.
For a moment, I thought it's a rainbow unicorn because that's like the logo of the convention.
Not quite. No, I was in true nerd style. I have this tattoo, which is from a LARP I ran many years ago.
Nice.
It says Occult Task Force, and it's the zombie hunting organization from a LARP that I wrote. Which if someone else's LARP, I think that would be cooler. But that was a decision I made when I was 23, and I might not make that same decision again. But this guy, I still really like. I think it's really gorgeous.
Cool. Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
Clearly, I've filled them up with knowledge.
Okay, so thank you very much, Grant. It's always a pleasure to have you, and we're very, very happy for you to be our guest.
No problem at all.
And we love your games. I already bought this Orc one.
Fantastic, great. Thank you for having me. And I once the video's uploaded and stuff, I'll share it around and stuff.
Cool.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.